Hello, everybody. I want to do a quick and serious couple of minutes here on Fairly Unbalanced with Mike Tallon on the first anniversary of the most current war in Ukraine. A year ago today, the Russian army rolled across the border and towards Kyiv, and pundits across the political spectrum were prognosticating that within a matter of days, if not weeks, the Putin would be in Kyiv popping a cork and celebrating the death of Vladimir Zelensky and installing a puppet government. Um, I didn't think that was going to happen. I wrote an essay about this about a year ago, which I'll link below, which indicates my belief that from the very, very, very early stages of this war, the Ukrainians were going to win, and they are going to win. Uh, and I came to that conclusion due to a strange source. It has something to do with understanding modern military history. But more than anything, it came from an analysis of Michelangelo's David. Bear with me for a second. You all know both the sculpture and the story. The story is simple enough, comes from the Bible, comes from the Torah. There is a great army led by Goliath, the greatest warrior of his age, a giant 8 feet tall, 3 cubits tall, or whatever the hell it was. He is leading the Philistine army. The Philistine army under Goliath has conquered kingdom after kingdom after kingdom, and the last kingdom standing is the kingdom of King Saul. And the two armies meet on the battlefield in the valley of Elah. Goliath comes out to the front, and he actually taunts King Saul, and he says, we don't have to have our armies do this. Why don't you just come out here and fight me like a man? And whoever wins that battle wins the war. King Saul takes a look at 3 cubits of Goliath and doesn't want a damn thing to do with that, so he looks at his sons and he says, any of you guys feeling like, trying to do your thing against Goliath? And they all kind of do a humana. They want nothing to do with it. And there's a standoff as Goliath rests his troops and mocks the army of King Saul. Watching all of this from up on the side of a hill is a young shepherd boy who may or may not be talking to God. The young shepherd boy looks down at this guy and looks down at the humiliation that he is bringing to his people, and he decides he's going to do something about it. And so one day he walks down from his sheep, from his flock of sheep on the side of the valley, and he comes down to the army, and he kind of sneaks his way through the army of King Saul, and he gets out onto the battlefield between the two armies, and he bends down and he picks up a single stone, puts it in his sling, and he walks out into the middle of the battlefield, and he fixes his eyes on Goliath, who looks at him and probably laughs and says, "This is the best you got?" And then you know the story that follows. Goliath charges or whatever, and David then whips his sling out and bang, 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 throws the stone, hits him in the head. Goliath falls down dead, and the army of King Saul wins. The Philistines are defeated, and David eventually becomes the king. David becomes Israel, and it's a great moment of geopolitical change. But the reason we remember the story is because it's this quintessential moment of underdog victory. Smallest guy in his tribe defeats the biggest warrior of the world. And we repeat that story over and over again, in part to tell us that it can happen. Because it is such a famous and iconic story, artists throughout history have represented it, visual artists. A visual artist faces a conundrum when they need to construct an image. They need to pick one image in a painting or a sculpture, one image that is going to tell the whole story overall. So what is the important moment? What's the most important moment of this story? Most artists, including Caravaggio and Donatello, choose the moment of the culmination of the victory. Caravaggio has a series of paintings where he shows David holding the severed head of Goliath after the battle, bloody stump, blood dripping from the neck. Donatello does a similar thing, only it's I think it's in bronze, and it's a small David figure with his foot perched on top of the head of Goliath, severed head after he's been defeated. Contemporary of theirs, Bernini, does really wonderful sculpture, not of what happens after the battle, but of a moment in the battle. He actually sculpts David with his body torqued around as he's releasing the sling, so you can actually see it's the moment when he's throwing the stone that will kill Goliath. Both important moments. One shows the result of the battle, one shows the action of the battle. But Michelangelo's sculpture is different. And I think that the moment that Michelangelo chose to depict explains why that sculpture has such an enigmatic hold over people even 500 years later. And it's because he sculpts something that was completely invisible at the time, and yet we can see it 500 years later. Picture the statue. You know it. David looks as calm as a Hindu cow on a street in New Delhi. Nothing's bothering him at all. He is zen-like and peaceful. He looks like he could be walking into a bath with a towel over his shoulder. And yet he's walking out into what everyone else presumes is near certain death. And yet, he is resolved. Take a closer look. Take a look down at his feet. I'll put a link in the thing down there somewhere. But take a look at his feet and notice how all of his weight is displaced onto his back foot. Take a look at it and think about where you've seen that stance before. And it's a pitcher on the mound ready to throw a fastball, because that's what David is. He's ready to act. Take a look at David's face. Note how his nostrils are inflared and his jugular notch is depressed as if he is in an inhalation. Take a look at his neck and you'll see the carotid artery in mid-pulse. Michelangelo sculpted the most important moment, the moment of transcendence in David's life, the moment when he wins the battle, which does not happen after the battle with the result. It does not even happen during the battle with the action. It happens when he decides to fight. And that's the image that Michelangelo captures. And a year ago today, when the Russian tanks rolled across the border and the images on the TV screens across the world were of 40 million Davids walking down to their local gas station to fill up vodka bottles to make Molotov cocktails to meet a modern mechanized army because they would not back down, you knew then that they were going to win. All that is required for a smaller nation to defeat a bigger nation is the will to fight and one other thing. They need the stones. In the Vietnam War against the United States invasion, the Viet Cong certainly had the will to fight, and they were able to source their weapons from a third party, Soviet Union. In the 1970s, when the Soviet Union attempted to pacify Afghanistan, the Mujahideen decided they were going to fight, and they were able to get weapons. That time it was from the United States. In George Bush's disastrous, barbarous, criminal wars in Iraq and also in Afghanistan, eventually becoming a criminal enterprise, we were unable to pacify those nations for a very long time because they had the will to fight and were getting a ready supply of weapons. The same thing is happening now in Ukraine, only it's a depleted Russian military that has already spent its best weaponry and its best soldiers, and they were unable to defeat a Ukrainian army that made the decision to fight, and a Ukrainian people that made the decision to fight. And the Ukrainian people will win if we and the rest of the world are wise enough to keep sending them stones. So, a year into this war against a fascist, terrible man in Vladimir Putin, glory to Ukraine and love to you all, and we'll see you here very, very soon, I hope.